Blase produces, above all, Art Zone. Gravediggers.
Hi, friends.
Hello, we're back.
Welcome back after a small break. We've been adulting. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, we try our best to be here as consistently as possible, but sometimes life gets in the way.
I've had a lot of paperwork. Just everyone is sending me paperwork recently.
Yeah, but I hope you guys have missed us, and I hope this compensates for us being away.
Yeah, this is one of those meta episodes where we not only talk about a case, but we examine the media surrounding that case and the politics that we think are at play. Part of me worries that this case has already been over-covered in the true crime community. Like, if you are a true crime hobbyist, definitely, I'd say Jodi Arias' case is way up there. But I think there are some political ideas here to discuss, and hopefully you all aren't totally Jodi Arias'd out by now. One of the best short series I found on this case is the Last Podcast on the Left series. It's genuinely one of the most fascinating deep dives I've ever heard, and it covers some details that we just can't get into in a single episode, so please give it a listen. Definitely their sense of humor isn't for everyone, and sometimes I'd say they go overboard, but the research is excellent. And I don't think the hosts just uncritically read off other people's opinions, which I appreciate. We will discuss some not safe for work topics during this episode. Most of our episodes have some profane language, which is why we've already marked the show as explicit on hosting platforms, but please be aware of that. Also, there are some mentions of pedophilia later on in this episode, but only mentions there are no underage victims in this case. So, if you can, think about the messiest breakup or the biggest heartbreak you've ever experienced. A time you poured yourself into someone and, in the end, it wasn't what they wanted. Remember the pain you felt, the hurt, sadness, anger, and maybe even the pang of desire for revenge. The twinge of vindictiveness in the hope that this person would sting as they had stung you. Most of us get over that feeling. While some of us might have a therapeutic retribution fantasy of taking a baseball bat to his car, a la Carrie Underwood in Before He Cheats,
Or taking a key to his leather seats.
for almost all of us, it's just that, a fantasy. We hope this loser, this cheater, this motherfucker gets his comeuppance in some form. But we'd never actually do anything to hurt him, and if something seriously terrible were to happen to him, we'd empathize. But that's not the case for Jodi Arias. On June 4th, 2008, she murdered Travis Alexander, her ex, her on-again, off-again boyfriend, her friend with benefits, her stalking victim, or her fuck buddy, depending on how you view their relationship. Media pundits like Nancy Grace saw this as a case of a beautiful, narcissistic psychopath slaughtering her ex-boyfriend in cold blood. Arias' defense team painted her as a woman abused. But we here at Das Criminal want to take another approach, one that recognizes the toxic nature of Jodi and Travis's relationship while affirming that nothing in Travis's behavior justifies his brutal death. In the words of author and activist Sarah Schulman, conflict is not abuse. Hurt feelings, even when caused by someone's deceit or selfishness, don't give someone else a free pass for violence.
Yeah, letting every average Joe be a literal executioner because they got their little feelies hurt is not exactly an effective way of conducting society, in my opinion.
Yeah, as we go through this case, at least for me, there is a point to which I very much empathize with Jodi, but then it stops. It goes way too far.
Yeah, I empathize with the hurt that she experienced, but then her reaction to it is completely unacceptable and unjustifiable, really.
Right, and there is a political point to that being hurt as an individual or as a community doesn't justify any type of violence you might inflict on somebody else.
Exactly, yeah.
So let's jump into the murder of Travis Alexander and the trial of Jodi Arias, and what these tell us about life, love, politics, and the media spectacle of a woman scorned. Let's start with the life of Travis Alexander. Born July 28, 1977, in Riverside, California. He was 30 years old at the time of his death. Travis did not have a good early childhood. He had meth-addicted parents who subjected him and his 7 siblings to abuse and neglect. Because of this unsafe environment, Travis moved in with his paternal grandparents when he was 11 years old. Travis's grandmother was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as the Mormons, and Travis became involved with the church. He was baptized as a child and he became a full member when he was 16, and he did missionary work in Denver, Colorado. Now, as far as I can tell, Travis Alexander graduated from high school but didn't get a college degree. Last podcast on the left points out that Travis remained involved in the Mormon church for the community it gave him, the stable upbringing, work connections, and friend group.
Yeah, I think it's actually fascinating how work and religion overlap in some circles. I mean, I've read similar notes about the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, where community also provides jobs to members because, some of its members would own businesses and they prefer to hire from within the religious community rather than without.
Right, and this point about your religious community also being your friends, your coworkers, really most of the people that you surround yourself with, it matters because if you step outside those religious boundaries, if you break the rules, if you're a bad Mormon or a bad Muslim, you risk losing all of the people around you.
Yeah, you become socially exiled and, people are social animals. They say that, but fundamentally, it's true. People are social animals. And to experience that sort of alienation is unpleasant at best. So I can see why people would want to keep hold of their community, regardless of what the common denominator is.
Mormonism is generally considered a more conservative faith with a strict set of rules. It's not just personally conservative. I mean, it is very personally conservative. But the church opposed interracial marriage and barred Black men from participating until 1978. Yikes, yikes, yikes. Forbidden things for Mormons include sex before marriage, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, coffee, tea, tobacco, pornography, abortion, same-sex relationships, foul language, and gambling.
The bit about banning coffee and tea I find interesting. I assume they have a blanket ban on any mind-altering substances of which caffeine is included. And I've also seen similar rules among certain hardline Islamist sects with regards to coffee and cigarettes, but tea, not so much. Also, things like, banning foul language I find hilarious because what's your line? Like, what would you describe as foul language?
Yeah, especially when most people who don't use foul language, they have other words that they use in the same circumstance. So they'll say like, oh, fudge. It's just an expression of frustration. Like, what is the problem?
Yeah, exactly. If your intent is to express frustration and you say, oh, fudge, surely by intent you're committing the same sin as saying a foul language or whatever.
Well, Travis Alexander followed most of these rules. It's never explicitly mentioned, but I guess that as someone who was a child of abusive, drug-dependent parents, he wanted to avoid repeating that cycle. And good for him, because he did. Drug use can often become an intergenerational coping mechanism, but I've also seen anecdotal cases where the family members of people with addictions become extremely anti-drug use. Addiction has affected my family, and my mom, for instance, is super cautious about prescription painkillers because she doesn't want to see those problems repeated. I mean, she's not like a teetotaler. She still does drink white wine here and there. But I understand where, from her experiences, she has seen addiction ruin people, and she really doesn't want that for her or for me.
I think everyone should be cautious about prescription painkillers in particular because up until very recently, they were prescribed like candy and, the result is an opioid epidemic.
But I think for Travis in particular, the church saying you're not supposed to use drugs and alcohol, for him, it's like, well, I've seen the damage that could do. So the church here is obviously trying to help me, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've heard that Alcohol Anonymous is also like very Christian in its processes. And I guess for many people, the sort of synthesis of rehabilitation away from addiction and finding a religious community, a sort of spiritual and religious community is one, it's unified.
Right. There are specific recovery groups that are not religious for the purpose
Yeah.
of catering to people who are not looking for spiritual help, but simply for addiction relief.
Yeah, but AA is not one of those.
But Travis Alexander held on to one vice: sex. Despite never being married, he engaged in sexual relationships with more than one woman. Some sources will insinuate that Jodi Arias tempted Travis Alexander into sexual activity, thus implying that he wasn't sexually active prior to their relationship. This is not true. Travis had sex before he met Jodi, and he had other girlfriends and sexting relationships while they continued seeing each other even after their official breakup.
Also, even if she did, quote unquote, tempt him, he's an adult male. Like, he's an adult man. Like, he can make his own decisions. Tempting is not assault. It's not coercion. It's like, even if she, like, I don't know, hit on him or seduced him or whatever, he's not an imbecile. Like, she didn't whack him with a mallet. He liked how she looked and he wanted to hook up with her.
Right. And so many of his friends interviewed in television true crime series and such about this case will say, like, well, Travis wanted to follow God's path, but it's hard with Jodi around. Stop, please.
Oh, he wasn't following God's path well before Jodi's. Like, shut the fuck up. If he wants to hook up, he wants to hook up. And that's something I find really, like, one of the things I find really weird about religion in general. And I don't mean to make this like a r/new atheism or whatever podcast, but a lot of it's so fascinating how a lot of like religious communities, modern day religious communities, are so focused on like prohibition of this or that, like the minute controlling the behavior of their members in very minute detail. Surely, like, trying to repress people's urges, like whether it's sex or like, I don't know, like foul language or gambling or coffee or tea, is very like counterintuitive. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like I need to read more about the phenomenon of religion prohibition.
Well, there's also a factor here, I think, where it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you tell young people that if they have sex in a relationship and then that relationship doesn't work out, that they have given part of themselves away, that they cannot get this back, and they have ruined themselves and ruined future relationships, you're going to make them feel that way. You plant the seed.
Oh, absolutely. And also, it's kind of counterintuitive in the sense that you tell them all of this stuff, and then they end up having sex anyways, and like their world doesn't actually like end. They don't get smitten on the spot. So they decide, they're like, oh, well, it's bad, but it's not as bad as these people make it out to be. So, like, I'll just do it and then feel bad about it afterwards.
Travis had sexual encounters with other Mormons, and every time the church found out, he was banned for a certain amount of time, which cut him off from his community. Really, a man in his 20s having sex shouldn't be weird at all. Most American men Travis's age have had about 5 or 6 opposite sex partners, and it's very normal for most American men and women to have more than one serious relationship in their lifetime. It's typically religious conservatives who think there's something wrong with this. We talk more about it on our previous episode about the Duggar family, but sexual purity culture has a lot of problems. I'm not talking about if you as an individual have your own values and boundaries, like that's fine. But the culture that arises around this, especially of shaming women in particular, is very toxic.
Oh, I agree. I mean, on that note, I believe that the Atlanta shooter who killed 8 people across 3 spa facilities last year was a Southern Baptist who claimed to have had a sex addiction. And I'm saying claimed because I don't know if his addiction was an actual addiction or he just had normal sex and felt really bad about it because he was like an evangelical of some sort. And he's previously spent time in evangelical rehab clinic for sex addicts, and apparently frequented the same spas he attacked for sexual services. All of this is to say that religious prohibitions on sex and, you know, the repression of sexual desire, you mentioned the shaming of women is really bad, and I completely agree. But I also think the flip side of that is the prohibitions of sex and the sort of the weird way sex is treated among men in these hyper-conservative religious communities often explodes in violent action, you know, in extremely violent action.
Right. Well, these men as well, they blame women for like somehow making them think about sex, for tempting them. You see it with the Atlanta shooter and with Jodi. We can blame Jodi for being violent, for doing a murder. Nobody has to blame her or Travis for having consensual sex with another adult. There's no blame.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's normal, it's good. This is why, and again, this is something that might be controversial. I genuinely have a disdain for any sort of religious rule about prohibition of sex. Like, if you don't want to have sex personally, that's fine. But if the reason you don't want to have sex is because your religion prohibits you from having sex, that's a concern and somewhat disturbing because you're suffocating a normal, very healthy, good part of the human experience of human desire because, some sort of mythical and spiritual laws that themselves evolved out of very different societies.
So I don't think Travis Alexander had the healthiest relationship with women. He wrote on the Who I'd Like to Meet section of his MySpace page, quote, "Jesus for starters. People who like to give high fives incessantly. I'd also like to meet Osama bin Laden and an all-out, no-holds-bar, winner-take-all cage fight."
I'm sorry. That is so good. I'll put my money on Osama. Osama could take him.
Osama bin Laden was like 6'5".
Well, he was 6'5", and the guy lived in a cave for like 20 years. So, I don't know. I feel like Travis is a lot more pampered than that.
Travis Alexander was killed by like a 120-pound girl.
Yeah, but she attacked him in surprise. Okay,
yes.
Let's be fair. Okay, yeah.
True. Continuing the quote, "Christopher Walken would be fun to eat lunch with. Really most people. Well, except for whores. They are a dime a dozen these days, especially on MySpace. So if your employment involves a webcam, I don't see it going anywhere. Outside of that, I'm good to go." End quote. Obviously, he wrote some of that in jest, like the Osama bin Laden thing, but I think it speaks to a certain hypocrisy that we'll maybe get into later. This is a man who is sexually active but looks down on women who are also having sex, including his own sex partners.
Yeah, and also you could tell how dated the story is because it's all happening on MySpace.
Travis was also involved in a multi-level marketing scheme called Prepaid Legal, now known as Legal Shield. For those who haven't heard about MLMs, they're basically pyramid schemes. Your earnings aren't based on how many hours you work, but on how much legal insurance, in this case, you sell, and more importantly, how many more people you recruit to sell under you.
Yeah, for those who are unfamiliar, like I was researching this episode, legal insurance is basically insurance for law and legal services. So much in like how medical insurance revolves around paying a monthly premium to an insurance provider, and in exchange for said provider covering your medical bills, legal insurance works the same way in exchange for legal aid and lawyer services.
Multi-level marketing schemes are extremely popular in Utah and among the Mormon community in particular. Perhaps this is because a lot of Mormons are expected to perform missionary work as young adults, so they're used to recruiting people. Plus, one might argue that both of these have some cult-like tendencies. Travis Alexander had some success with prepaid legal, more than most people in MLMs, but he wasn't the financial mogul that some of the media would have us believe. Travis owed more money on his Mesa, Arizona home than it was worth, due to taking out one of those predatory high-interest loans really common leading up to the 2008 crash. Now, I'm not saying that's like a moral failing on his part. Lots of people took out these loans and got scammed, basically. But as a result, Travis had to get 2 roommates to help pay the bills. At the time of his death, Travis Alexander was actually borrowing money from Jodi, who wasn't particularly well off herself. So again, this is another part of the narrative we see, almost painting Jodi Arias as a gold digger. And while Travis did have some of the furnishings of being well off, he did own his home. Well, he had a mortgage, but you get my point. He's not paying rent to a landlord. He owned a car, things like that. He's not this wealthy guy.
Yeah, also, as far as I'm concerned, we're going to get into this later when we cover Jodi, but Jodi worked in the service industry, and in my opinion, her work is a lot more honest than, being part of an MLM.
Right, and I suppose, according to some sources, Travis would also give motivational speeches, and I don't know if this was connected to the MLM, or if he was maybe talking about how bad of a childhood he had and how he overcame. Maybe it was connected to recruiting people for Mormonism. I have no idea. But he might have also had some financial stake in that. So let's get into Jodi Arias. She was born July 9th, 1980, in Salinas, California, and had a relatively normal upbringing, but dropped out of high school in 11th grade and moved in with her boyfriend when she was 17. People who knew Jodi say she would mold herself to fit whoever she was dating at the time. From moving in with her boyfriend when she was 17, to getting breast implants and dyeing her hair blonde to look more like a boyfriend's ex-wife, who she suspected he still had feelings for, Jodi was like a chameleon who would adjust her lifestyle to what she thought a man would like. I have mixed feelings about this. I agree that you shouldn't fundamentally change who you are or give up things you care about to please other people, but I also think some compromise can be healthy in a relationship. We all know someone who can be rude or unpleasant and then say, "That's just how I am," when someone says something about it. Sometimes growing in a relationship and changing your behavior is good, actually, but Jodi Arias is not a good example of this.
I agree. I mean, I actually think that healthy relationships are the ones that facilitate or encourage personal growth in both parties. And being with a partner that encourages this growth and enables your goals of being better, whether that's, in your fitness, your career, your political principles, anything really, is a healthy dynamic. But changing your appearance into your boyfriend's ex-wife is, folks, not good. I do want to point out that, when people say don't change, I think, change is a law of nature, entropy, everything changes. But I think positive change is what we should aspire to seek and not negative change or in this case, being a chameleon with no personality of your own.
Right, especially changing your appearance to fit what you think another person wants is usually a sign of very unhealthy self-esteem. Not always, but usually.
Yeah, and it seems from what I've understood, it seems that her boyfriend didn't even articulate that, he still had feelings for his ex-wife or whatever. She just did it because she suspected it.
Right, yes.
Weird, really weird.
So, kind of related to this, Jodi's MySpace page has a long list of her interests, which she would have had to type. It's not like Facebook where you just click like on things, you physically have to type this out. And some are pretty mundane, like music and road trips. But she also lists affiliate programs, capitalism, and revelation. Okay, Jodi. All right.
What an interesting combination.
I think she's trying to be like Travis.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I imagine by that point, revelation for his Mormonism, capitalism because he's an MLM guy. And yeah, she's copying him, basically.
Jodi's family owned a restaurant where she worked growing up, and she worked at bars and restaurants a lot as a young adult. Someone at one of these restaurants showed Jodi a prepaid legal DVD, and she bought into the company. Jodi and Travis met in 2006 at a prepaid legal convention in Las Vegas, Nevada. Why would an MLM with so many Mormons hold a conference in Vegas? It's drugs, alcohol, gambling, and sex abound.
Okay, so my theory is that because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and that is, a constitutional amendment, therefore any evidence done in Vegas cannot be used in the court of God.
It is very weird to me. It doesn't seem to be catering to most of their, I don't know what to call these people, representatives. But then another part of me is I bet all of these repressed Mormons are so hyped to go to Vegas for this convention.
Oh, it's probably the best event of the year for them.
Mm-hmm. So a bunch of prepaid legal people were hanging around a rainforest cafe, and Travis saw Jodi and thought she was pretty. So he invited her to the prepaid legal ball. Now, Jodi and Travis had a whirlwind romance. When they met, Jodi had a boyfriend back in California, that guy who she dyed her hair for. But she soon broke up with him to pursue a serious relationship with Travis. Only a week later, Travis, quote-unquote, challenged Jodi to read the Book of Mormon, thus beginning his work on converting her. Travis and Jodi would meet at Travis's friend's house, Chris and Sky Hughes, because it was about halfway between their homes, and the two soon began a sexual relationship. For a while, and take this with a huge grain of salt because only one of these people is still alive, Jodi and Travis would have oral and anal sex because these allegedly aren't as bad in the eyes of the Mormon Church. Okay, it's up to you to form your own sexual boundaries and values, but this heteronormative, only one kind of sex really counts thing is just, it shows social immaturity. Sex is not a game of points.
That's very hilarious to me and interesting because I'd have thought personally that anal sex would be considered worse, if only because, I don't know, it mimics sodomy. But I guess for Mormons, vaginal sex is considered the most pure or something. I don't know. These rules are very mind-bendingly inane and also, again, like I said before, are a product of a very different social context. And a lot of the prohibitions on sex in particular reflect contexts in which pregnancy and having a child in previous societies, it's very important to know who the father of the child is. And like having a child out of wedlock where you can't confirm the father leads to like all sorts of like social conflict between people.
I see historically why it matters, but I think in the contemporary Mormon church or in any socially conservative religion, these rules are not real. Like, I'm pretty sure Mormonism bans all sexual contact before marriage, and oral sex and anal sex are sex.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could argue even like things like making out should be banned under the same logic. But yeah, I think it makes sense insofar as the rules were made in societies that were very patriarchal and where property and inheriting property was very much patrilineal. So, you know, proving that you're this child of a particular man meant that you could inherit that person's property. And so prohibitions on premarital sex were part of like, you know, a product of those property relations. But in this situation, you know, with condoms and with birth control, and we live in a society where that's not a problem anymore. So yeah, it's completely pointless.
So Travis Alexander baptized Jodi Arias into the Mormon church less than 2 months after they met. This is very fast for a full conversion, but I don't think Jodi Arias was ever a devout Mormon. I don't think she was a devout anything. If she would have been like a devout Catholic, then she wouldn't have converted in the first place. But she was changing herself for Travis Alexander and becoming who she thought he wanted her to be. And in fairness to her, he did challenge her to read the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, see, that part I actually laughed at because I find it hilarious that, like, this guy thinks he's trying really hard to convert this person and to, like, add another member to the church. Whereas she is so like, such an empty vessel that, like, if he was a Satanist, she would become a Satanist. Like, if he was fucking, like, worshipping, like, the old eldritch gods or whatever, she would do the same.
Right. And this sort of marks the beginning of this, like, mixed message relationship where he is converting her to his religion, which to most of us would indicate something very serious. Like, if someone asked me to convert to his or her religion in a relationship, I'd think, like, they're seriously thinking about getting married or something. But then at the same time, they start this sexual relationship. And as we'll see, he judges her for it.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a good person. Obviously, I don't think he should be murdered, but he's not exactly, you know, a good person, generally
He is
speaking.
not being kind and fair in this relationship.
Yeah.
So Travis and Jodi had PIV sex a few hours after the baptism ceremony. Now, commenters point out that when Jodi and Travis had sex, she was ruling herself out as a potential marriage partner for him because Travis wanted an inexperienced Mormon girl. Again, this is such a toxic situation. If you engage in consensual sex with someone else and then judge that person for what you also just did, I don't think we even need to say how hypocritical that is. The notion that women in particular have to abstain from sexual activity because the same men who have consensual sex with them will later label them as not wife material because they had sex is so dated and sexist. I mean, I was once told, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? As in, why would a man marry a woman if she'll have sex with him anyway? But here's the thing. I am not a cow and I am not for sale.
Okay, but counterpoint, why buy the bull when you can get its cum for free?
Yeah, also, you know what happens to cattle, like male cattle, young bulls? They're killed. They're made into veal. So,
They're very delicious.
Jodi's defense team later called her Travis's, quote, dirty little secret, end quote. And I think this is a pretty apt description of most of their relationship. Travis tried to compartmentalize Jodi because he wanted to have a sexual relationship without having it affect his standing in the Mormon community. Travis's friends did not like Jodi. They thought she was very forward, and they could tell her conversion to Mormonism was insincere. Later on, Travis's friends were very concerned with Jodi's jealousy and obsessive behavior when it came to Travis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information that we have about this case that comes from Travis's friends. And I would take that with a grain of salt because while some of their points might be accurate, they're also not, impartial observers. They had a very clear bias and they're exonerating one party at the cost of the other.
It sounds like Travis thought he had a handle on this situation, that he could have sex with Jodi while dating other Mormon women who he would actually seriously consider marrying, and then eventually cut things off with Jodi. Basically, he thought she was going to be his side piece until he wanted to get married and then she would just go away. But he didn't realize how unstable she was.
Also, I guess, don't speak ill of the dead or whatever, but surely his friends who thought that Jodi was insincere or they thought they were concerned with her jealousy or whatever, surely they would raise the issue to Travis that he was being a dick to her too, no?
It doesn't sound like it, though. There are many interviews of his friends, and this Chris and Sky Hughes, who we referenced earlier, they wrote a whole book on the murder and the trial called, Our Friend Travis or something like that, about, how much of an angel he was.
Yeah, which begs the question, if they're enabling him being a dick to her, they can't come out and be like, oh, she was jealous, she was obsessive, she was, psychologically, dangerous or whatever, but, you were enabling your friend to be a dick to her.
Well, I also think, and of course, as we said again and again, Jodi Arias' reaction was so over the top, so inappropriate, so violent and horrendous. Travis did not deserve that, of course. But if you are in a sexual relationship with someone, if you're in a friends with benefits relationship, even if that person says, oh, I'm not interested in anything more than this, I'm not interested in dating or marriage, but you really believe that they are, it is better for you and for them to get out of that situation. Now, I understand everyone has agency, and of course, you could turn around and be like, well, she said she was fine with this arrangement. But if all of her behavior says that she's not, you are prolonging the inevitable hurt. Now, in this case, that hurt was obviously escalated into something horrible, but it's not smart to do that. Please don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, both parties here were acting with very, very poor judgment. I think it's important to note that each person does have some level of individual agency and, on this, in the sense that if you're explicit with someone about your intentions, if you're with someone and you're like, listen, I'm not looking for something serious, I just want a casual situation or whatever, and they accept that on its face value, then that's fine. But if you're on the opposite end of that and you think that even though they're telling you they want something casual, your presence could change their mind or whatever, you could do X, Y, and Z to convert them into wanting you for a serious partner, then you need to leave. And if you're in a casual situation with someone and you see them going above and beyond or really showing red flags when it comes to exhibiting things that are not what a casual situation is, then you need to leave as well.
So Jodi's feelings for Travis escalate really quickly, and before long, she's making the trip hundreds of miles to his house uninvited and knocking on the door. If nobody answered, Jodi would crawl through the doggy door. Yikes.
Okay, time to get a smaller dog or door, or send the dog upstate and get a door without a flap.
Jodi also had a t-shirt custom made that said Travis Alexanders with a possessive apostrophe. What the hell?
That is interesting.
At one point, Jodi went through Travis's MySpace account and found sexually explicit messages to a married Mormon woman. But instead of ending the relationship, she basically used it to blackmail him into staying in a romantic relationship with her. Again, everything about this relationship is toxic.
By blackmail, I assume she threatened to reveal those messages to the church and thus lead to Travis being suspended from church activity, which is something that he really didn't want. And so in that sense, I assume the blackmail was effective.
But also, girl, if you are in an exclusive relationship with this man, or you want to be, and you found sexually explicit messages to a married woman, break up, leave, obviously.
Yeah, that is certainly an interesting reaction to finding out that you're ostensibly being cheated on.
And I am very hesitant to say someone in an abusive relationship should leave, because we all know it's not that simple, but this is not abusive. This is not the same as physically or mentally abusing someone. Being an asshole is not the same as an abuser.
Yeah, I mean, this, I don't think that either party was abusive here. I do think it's a very toxic situation for the both of them. And at various points, both parties should have walked away. But I don't think, it was abuse. I don't think each person was trapped in a way in that relationship. So
Not abusive yet, we should say, because,
yeah.
After only a few months of an official relationship, Jodi and Travis broke up, but their sexual relationship didn't end there. Okay, again, guys, you probably don't need relationship advice. You're probably all very happy in your relationships or happy being single or dating or what have you. If you end a relationship, you cannot keep having sex with that person without someone's feelings getting hurt. I promise.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It never works like for the benefit of everyone.
No, either you end up back together, which is, if that's what you want, great. Or someone else like eventually moves on and then it's not good, guys. It's not.
Yeah.
So actually, Jodi broke up with Travis, but then she moved from California to Mesa, Arizona to be closer to him. So again, on both sides, it's like these very mixed messages. It's difficult to say at which point Jodi Arias turned into a full-on stalker because Jodi and Travis continued a sexual relationship this entire time. But she began spying on Travis, sneaking into his house, and even slashed his tires. Which, someone destroying something that belongs to you is a huge, huge, huge red flag.
Hey, she just listened to Carrie Underwood's Before He Cheats and decided it was an instructional video.
I think that song came out in 2006, maybe, and this is happening in 2008, so you might have a point.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think if Jodi Arias had one good friend to be like, Jodi, stop, this whole thing could have been prevented. We've all been in messy breakups or unhealthy relationships where we want to text that person or check their social media to see what they're up to, but our friends remind us that we deserve respect. Amr and I have been friends for years, and he has literally told me before, Aaron, don't text your ex, he's messing with your head. And it's hard at first, but if you focus on other things that are healthier for you, you will move on. I bet Jodi didn't have many close friends and pretty much only connected with her boyfriends. And I bet she's one of those people who would say things like, I don't really like hanging out with other girls because there's so much drama. I prefer guy friends. And meanwhile, she acts like a character on a soap opera.
Yeah, also, I sincerely doubt she even has guy friends to begin with either. And I agree because I think if Jodi had a close circle of like stable, healthy friends, they'd have intervened ages ago, like dyeing your hair blonde and getting breast implants to look like your boyfriend's ex stage. That should have triggered an intervention, let alone like converting to Mormonism after 2 months of seeing someone.
It's interesting too because it sounds like Travis's friends did try to intervene. They did not like Jodi. They told him that. They told him that they thought she was really weird. And he hid her from his friends. He ended up keeping her a secret and again, trying to compartmentalize their relationship. Now, stalking is a serious problem that often leads to violence, but I don't think Travis Alexander really appreciated the danger of the situation he was in. Despite Jodi's repeated boundary crossing, Travis continued to hang out with her, even going on a road trip with her, and the two kept having sex. Last podcast on the left points out that Travis is yo-yoing Jodi. He's using her for sex and he doesn't think the stalking behavior will escalate into something worse. Now, we don't want to victim blame Travis. Nobody deserves to be a victim of stalking or violence that Jodi will eventually act out toward Travis. And Jodi's response to his behavior is not normal, even in the realm of a toxic relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Travis's actions warrant the stalking or the violence, but at the same time, he continues to act in a way that enables her and keeps her in his orbit because, well, he wants sex, and that comes down to being inculcated with very misogynist ideas about sex and women that basically lead him to try and compartmentalize his sexual desires away from the Mormon community.
Right. I think, like you said, him keeping her in his orbit, I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly what he's trying to do.
Yeah, it's all just so messed up.
Right. He wants her there for sex when he wants to have sex, but otherwise he wants her to go away.
Yeah, which raises the question of societies or religions or any system where rules prohibit sex end up in these situations where people, obviously driven by their sexual desires, will seek it, but then engage in very toxic and harmful behavior in order to like match the cognitive dissonance of their faith with their sexual desires.
Right, because most other 30-year-old men in Travis's situation would just go to the bar, go to the club, go to wherever you like to go, and find someone who you think looks nice and you might get along with even for a night and be like, hey, do you want to come home? Do you want to hook up?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, I usually am not that outright. I'll be like, hey, what's up first? But yeah.
Guys, if you ever see Amr and he what's ups you, you know what's about to happen.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I'm not about, like, obviously, eventually, but if I go with the what's up, that's good. Things are, like, I'm going somewhere.
So Jodi eventually left Mesa and moved back to California to live with her grandparents, but she still kept in contact with Travis Alexander and seemed to want to continue some sort of relationship with him. In spring of 2008, Travis was looking forward to a prepaid legal conference in Cancun, Mexico, and Jodi assumed she would be his guest. But Travis told her he was going alone. But Travis didn't actually plan on taking the trip by himself. He had invited someone named Mimi, a Mormon girl who he had been dating. Jodi somehow found out about this, and she was livid. On May 28th, 2008, Jodi stages a fake burglary at her grandparents' house, where the only stolen items are a DVD player, some cash, and her grandfather's .25 caliber pistol. Now keep this in mind because it's a .25 caliber pistol that was used to shoot Travis Alexander. Jodi rented a car and picked up several cans of gas so that she could drive all the way to Mesa without having any receipts or footage of her buying gas near his house.
Okay, you have to admit, that's actually smart. Like, I'm impressed with that strategy.
Yes, but at the same time, as we'll go on to see, Jodi is so organized and so disorganized at the same time. It's fascinating.
Oh, yeah, no, as we go further, like, there are some things she does where I'm like, wow, that's actually ridiculously smart. And then other things where I'm like, you're ruining your own preparation, you dumb idiot.
So Jodi also planned to see a man named Ryan Burns up in Salt Lake City the day she left Mesa. Ryan didn't know it, but he was going to be part of her alibi. So on June 4th, 2008, Jodi turns off her cell phone so that its locating services won't place her in the area, and drives to Travis Alexander's house in Mesa, Arizona. Whether Travis invited her or knew she was coming is unknown, but the two did appear to engage in consensual sex, and we know this because they took explicit photos of each other in Travis's room. Jodi also took photos of Travis in the shower. Then, Jodi Arias attacked. She stabbed Travis Alexander at least 27 times, nearly decapitating him as she slit his throat from ear to ear. After blitz attacking him, she shot him in the head with her grandfather's pistol. Then she dragged his body back into the shower and tried to wash him down to hide the evidence. As Jodi attacked Travis, the camera, which it seemed like she dropped, began taking pictures. Some of these are available online, and they aren't particularly graphic, but they do show a bloody scene with Jodi's foot in it. Jodi deleted the camera photos, and somehow, the camera ended up in the washing machine. Now, law enforcement seems to think that Jodi dropped it in there and ran the machine to try and destroy evidence. But I think it's also possible that the camera was on the bed, and Jodi threw the bed sheets into the washing machine to clean them and didn't realize she'd also put in the camera. Otherwise, I think she probably would have taken the camera, or at least the memory card, with her to dispose of them wherever she threw the murder weapons.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense because based on what we've seen so far, for someone who's so calculated about it and knew to turn off the cell and to avoid being triangulated and taking gas canisters with her, I'm sure she would have taken the camera if only to chuck it in a microwave to fry its circuit board and destroy its memory. Also, all of her preparation so far, it feels to me like someone who's watched like a copious amounts of CSI episodes.
Right, she does all this preparation, like packing the gas cans, turning off her phone so that nobody knows she's in Mesa, no one can trace her there. And then there are literal photos of her at the scene. Like, it's so disparate.
Yeah.
Jodi then left Travis's house and drove to Salt Lake City, where she hung out with Ryan Burns, who later testified that she wasn't acting strange. He did notice, however, that Jodi had dyed her formerly blonde hair back to its natural brown. Someone in the media, I think Nancy Grace, speculates that Jodi did this so that Travis's neighbors wouldn't be able to easily identify her leaving Travis's house, and thus there wouldn't be any witnesses to her in the area at the time of his murder. But I also suspect this had something to do with Jodi's identity, her chameleon personality that we discussed before. She changed her physical appearance to represent how she was moving into a new phase in her personal life after killing Travis Alexander. The whole thing is very Gone Girl, in my view. I don't want to give any book or movie spoilers, but if you've read or seen Gone Girl, you'll know exactly what I mean. And I think this case is popular for many of the same reasons Gone Girl was a hit.
I mean, it's very Gone Girl meets Silence of the Lambs. There's a lot of like changing of appearance that, to me, it reminds me of Silence of the Lambs.
Right, there's some symbolism to her.
Oh, yeah.
As she drives up to Utah and turns on her phone, Jodi Arias leaves Travis Alexander a very mundane voicemail, as though they didn't just hang out and she has no idea he's dead. This was another effort to deflect suspicion, but it would all backfire. Note to our listeners, one of the first things homicide detectives do is check a victim's phone and social media and see who they last contacted and who contacted them. If you killed them, you should avoid having your name pop up on that digital suspect list.
Yeah, that was not a smart move on her part.
Right, but she thinks it is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for her, it's part of that like whole like package of preparation that she thinks is going to get her away from like being suspected or whatever. But so far, up until the gas canisters and turning your phone off, good. Calling the person right after you kill them, not good.
Right, and this is the move of a narcissist and a compulsive liar who thinks nobody else can see them. Like, she honestly thinks, oh, if I leave this voicemail, they'll be like, it can't be Jodi because she obviously didn't know he was dead and she had no problems with him. Like, do you honestly think other people would not figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess she also, I don't know if she banked on whether Travis's friends would have testified or told the cops that she was obsessive or stalkerish or whatever. But yeah, it does seem that she's too smart by half.
Meanwhile, Travis's body was decomposing in his shower, and his two roommates somehow didn't notice. I think they thought he had already left for Cancun when he wasn't actually supposed to leave for a few days later, so I guess they weren't very close friends. But it's very creepy to think about a decomposing body in your house.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived with roommates before, and I've had roommates where, like, if they weren't around for a while, I would have been concerned. But there were other roommates that were like so detached. And, you know, if they had their own washroom, like if their washroom was separate from my washroom, I would probably not notice myself. Like, I'm not like saying that because like, I assume, like, I guess Travis's washroom was separate from the others or something.
Right.
Which makes sense because he owns the house. Yeah, he owns the house as well, which makes sense. He would probably be living in the main suite. But yeah, like, I guess they weren't friends. They were just roommates.
Yeah, they thought, oh, he's probably on vacation. Didn't he have that vacation planned? I guess it's not that weird, really.
Yeah.
Travis also missed an important prepaid legal conference call, and his friends and coworkers thought that was very unusual. Jodi attended a prepaid legal conference in Salt Lake City, where she had to pretend that she had no idea Travis was dead because his body hadn't been discovered yet. Marcus Parks on Last Podcast on the Left speculates that this probably didn't fit with Jodi's plan. She wanted his roommates to find his body sooner so that she could act upset at the conference. Travis's friends didn't find his body until they went to the house 5 days after the murder, when they couldn't get a hold of him before the trip. Jodi attended the memorial and told everyone that even though the two were no longer dating, she was so sad over Travis's death. She also posted on MySpace about missing Travis. When the police began asking Travis's friends who might have hurt him, they all had one answer: Jodi Arias. Jodi seemed to think, somehow, that the police wouldn't connect her to the murder, despite the fact that all Travis's friends suspected her, she left the camera in the house with explicit photos of them, and her blood and hair were all over the scene. Because of this hubris, and perhaps wanting to involve herself in the investigation to figure out what law enforcement knew, Jodi called the lead detective multiple times to let him know that she wanted to help in any way she could with the case. Again, she thinks she's so smart, but she is so transparent in all of this. People are asking me a lot of questions already answered by my I didn't kill Travis Alexander phone call.
Yeah, I mean, all of her hard work in preparing for the murder is just completely useless because the dumb idiot just can't keep a lid on her ego.
Obviously, the police hone in on Jodi Arias and bring her in for questioning regarding the murder of Travis Alexander. Now, Jodi has this phony alibi where she claims to have been driving from California to Utah but got lost along the way and drove in the wrong direction for over 100 miles before getting back on track. This is something she said to Travis in her voicemail after she'd already killed him. The lead detective points out to Jodi that even if she got lost, slept in her car, and then started driving again as she claimed, there are still around 18 hours unaccounted for in her story. Police were also able to recover those photos from the memory card of the camera that had gone through the washing machine. Among those photos were images of Jodi Arias in Travis's bedroom, naked. When confronted with the time-stamped photos of her naked in Travis's room on the day of his murder, when she said she wasn't anywhere near Arizona, Jodi admits that it looks like her, but still tries to deny being there and suggests the photos may have been photoshopped.
Which, this is happening in 2007, 2008. Photoshop. We don't have the same deep fakes we have now.
These habitual liars are so used to fibbing to the people around them that they think they're invisible, that people can't see what's right in front of them. Anyone who knows the basics of police interrogation techniques, including a competent defense attorney, would be able to tell that law enforcement already has Jodi and they're trying to catch her in this web of lies to sabotage whatever defense she might have before she can start crafting it. And it's working.
Yeah, and we've said it 100 times on this pod already, but never talk to cops without an attorney present. I don't care how smart you think you are, just have an attorney there for God's sake. Alas for Jodi, she probably thought she was too smart for the detectives. And yeah, pathological liars seem to have a habit of thinking that if they're trapped in a lie, that more lying will get them out of that initial lie.
Also, if you are a person who habitually lies like this all of the time and you think people don't know, they do. I promise you that they do. They're talking about it behind your back. Everyone talked about it with Jodi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when she's being arrested for Travis's murder, Jodi asks detectives if she could clean herself up before her mugshot. They say no, by the way. Some commenters point to this as an instance of Jodi's vanity, and I think that's part of it, but I also think it's part of Jodi trying to remain in control, even if it's being taken away from her by virtue of the arrest. She can try to control her appearance and her image, and we've seen her exercise this control before in her relationships. While waiting in the interrogation room, Jodi also does a handstand and sings Here With Me by Dido and Oh Holy Night. This is strange behavior, but I think it's meant to be self-soothing.
I mean, to be fair, Dido is a great artist.
Jodi then came up with an extraordinary tale. She did go to Mesa to see Travis, but when she was there, a man and a woman broke into the house, murdered Travis, and threatened to murder her if she told anyone. Jodi even says that these people looked at her driver's license and said, quote, "You're that bitch from California," end quote. Girl, what? These people know who you are?
That is an impressive story to concoct in a few hours.
You're that bitch from California. She's the wife of a mafia boss.
Yeah, I guess she just watched The Godfather before getting interrogated.
Clearly, this story is total bullshit, and the detective pretty much tells Jodi right away that it's the most ridiculous thing he's ever heard. This is somehow a degree worse than the Jennifer Pan bullshit story, because at least in Jennifer's case, there really were other people involved. Jodi just made these people up.
Yeah, with Jennifer, at least she hired people to do the murder. Jodi did it herself and then invented imaginary people.
Guys, please. You are not going to talk your way out of a murder charge. Get a lawyer, please. This web of lies only complicates any possibility of a future defense because Jodi clearly tried to cover up the murder at first by creating a fake alibi, showing that she had pre-planned it. She thought it wouldn't be traced back to her, which is why the bogus story she concocted is so obviously fake.
Yeah, she took an axe to all her well-crafted preparation and basically just left a slam dunk first-degree murder case for the prosecution. She gave them everything: intent, pre-planning, evidence. It's all there. She just handed it to them in a silver platter.
Jodi also gives these weird interviews where she says she would never murder Travis and that these mysterious ninjas killed him and no jury will ever convict her.
I mean, I think that these CSI type TV shows like Law and Order, CSI, what have you, Criminal Minds, they all reflect a certain type of, I guess, police propaganda insofar as the defense attorneys are always portrayed as like these sleazy guys who want to get the criminal off. And like whenever you call for an attorney, that's you like, admitting your guilt. But like, just to underline again, if you're ever in an interrogation room, no matter how pleasant the cops in that room may be to you or how polite, just get an attorney. Just be there with an attorney. Simple as that.
Right. And like, if anything were ever to happen to me, God forbid, and police came knocking on Amar's door, Amar and I live in different countries, guys. He would not be able to come down here and murder me without like alerting someone. But still, Amar, I'd want you to get a lawyer. Don't be erroneously blamed for my murder. I'd hate that.
Oh, I'd absolutely get a lawyer immediately. And likewise, by the way, sorry, I just want to say, if the reverse happened, please get a lawyer as well.
I'm going to be a lawyer. But even if you are a lawyer, please get another lawyer. Like, why not?
Yeah, like if I ever become a lawyer, I don't think I would defend myself in court. I'd rather get like someone else.
The murder happened in 2008, but it took several years for the case to go to trial, in part because it was a death penalty case in Arizona, and there are lots of hoops to jump through. The prosecutor for this case, Juan Martinez, had pretty much all of the evidence on his side. The photos, Jodi's bloody handprints at the scene, and the history of stalking behavior from Jodi. Also, the Maricopa County Sheriff at this time was the infamous Joe Arpaio. This is an extremely conservative county, and it's no surprise that the prosecution pursued the death penalty here. Now let's just say Jodi's appointed defense attorney, Kirk Nurmi, was no Johnny Cochran. He apparently hated working on her case, and he later lost his law license for writing a tell-all book about it.
I guess he lost his license because he broke privilege. Like
he did, yeah.
Privilege, yeah.
I don't know whether Kirk Nurmi was a public defender by profession or whether he was assigned Jodi's case as part of a program where the state pays attorneys in private practices to take on some of their overflow, which is something that I know happens here in New York. Apparently, he tried to get out of this case for a long time, and the state wouldn't allow it. I will say that I think Kirk Nurmi was dealt a bad case from the start, since Jodi had completely fucked up the police interviews.
Honestly, there isn't much an attorney can do here. Like, if I was a defense attorney, I guess I'd try to bargain a plea deal, maybe to get, like, life in prison over the chair, but I don't know.
Right. And in that case, that's pretty much it. If your client clearly did it and you have all of this evidence stacked up against them, you're just trying to avoid the death penalty.
Pretty much, yeah.
Jodi also tried to defend herself at one point, but when she tried to submit journal entries allegedly made by Travis as evidence, and was then discovered to have samples of Travis's handwriting in her cell that she was trying to copy, the court ordered her to stay with her appointed defender.
Okay, so her preparation initially, like, made sense, but at this point, she's just so dumb and inept that even the court was, like, insisting that, hey, listen, stick with a professional defense attorney instead of, like, submitting a piece of paper with a note in crayon saying it wasn't me.
Right. And I think you pointed to this sort of Law and Order perception before, that the defense is like so slimy and they can just do anything and make things up in their defense. You can't submit fake, completely uncorroborated evidence. It's not allowed.
Yeah, like isn't there an entire phase of trial where they document the evidence they're going to talk about later?
Right. All evidence has to be entered in. The prosecution's evidence has to be shown to the defense. The defense does not have to show their exhibits beforehand, but both sides usually do things like submit a list of witnesses. And while you won't know exactly what those people are going to say, you'll have a good idea. You'll be like, yeah, this person hates me because I did this bad thing one time, so that's not going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it happens before, the courtroom drama scenes are very much what they are, drama. There's a lot of this happens before, so there's no, like, surprise sprung, usually.
Jodi's defense team came up with a new defense. Travis had consistently abused Jodi, and she had killed him in self-defense. They also tried to paint Travis as the worst thing anyone could be, a pedophile.
I mean, let's see how that defense strategy plays out.
The defense played an audio tape that Jodi had recorded of the pair having phone sex. At one point, Travis says to Jodi that her orgasm sounded like a 12-year-old girl having an orgasm. This is a pretty weird thing to say, and I would be pretty grossed out if someone said it to me, but like, the daddy dom little girl thing isn't unheard of. Again, I think it's weird and creepy and needs some serious unpacking by a licensed therapist. I don't think it should be normalized, but I don't think it necessarily indicates that someone like wants to harm a child.
I think if I was the defense attorney at this point, I would play that recorded audio tape, and then I would just be like, how would Travis know what a 12-year-old girl's orgasm sounds like, huh? And just like drop the mic and leave the courtroom.
I mean, he obviously has some messed up ideas about women and sex, as we've gone over, and like maybe he thinks this is okay. It's not. It doesn't mean that he's a pedophile. It doesn't mean that he's abusing Jodi Arias, but it is weird.
Oh, I know. Absolutely, yeah. I think it's, I don't know, like, again, like I said earlier, like, if I was the defense, I'd just go with a plea deal. The fact that they're trying with all this weird, like, like, it's not gonna work. Like, it's just not gonna work. Just accept it.
So the trial revolved around Jodi and Travis's sex life, with the prosecution painting Jodi as a woman scorned, and the defense claiming that she was abused by a pedophile. TV personalities like Nancy Grace had a field day because it was a case that included sex and violence. Now, Jodi Arias testified for 18 days. This is pretty much unheard of. Most defense teams would never put a defendant on the stand in a capital murder trial and let them talk for 18 days. Jodi tried very hard to make Travis out to be a sex predator, but nobody was buying her story. Again, the lies caught up to her. People can see through it. On May 7th, 2013, Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder after the jury deliberated for 15 hours. Jodi Arias was eligible for the death penalty, but after 2 rounds of deliberation with no unanimous agreement, she was sentenced to life in prison.
Yeah, from what I understand, researching for this case, apparently the death penalty requires unanimous agreement by the jury. Otherwise, it's reduced to life in prison. So I'm not sure if that's like a federal law or Arizona state law, but that seems to be the case in what happened here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when they do jury selection for these cases, they will weed out everyone who has a moral problem with the death penalty. But if you do that, you are only inviting people typically with a certain political outlook onto the jury. And I don't think that's fair. Like, I don't think that should be allowed.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I think part of the trial should be, like, if someone says they have a moral objection to the death penalty, part of the trial should be like, this is why we think this person deserves the death penalty. Like, this is why your moral issue here should, I mean, I'm not saying, like, you know, the death penalty is good, but like limiting the number of juries based on their perspective on the death penalty is, I think, it creates bias in and of itself, like you said.
Prosecutor Juan Martinez has also been #MeToo'd and disbarred for sexually harassing women in the workforce and for leaking the name of a juror in the Arias case to a blogger with whom he was having a sexual relationship. Now, of course, Arias' lawyers are obviously pushing for an appeal on these grounds, which, good. If the state has the power to lock someone up for life, it also needs to re-examine the case when new factors come to light. Just my opinion.
Oh, I agree. I mean, Arias obviously did it, but I think that there should be a situation where a defendant can appeal if it's shown that the case was tampered with, which it was.
Right, yes. At her sentencing hearings, Jodi Arias showed quote-unquote survivor t-shirts she had designed and said she would sell them and donate the proceeds to survivors of domestic violence, obviously perpetuating the idea that she was somehow connected to this as a victim.
I mean, they'd certainly sell more than the custom Travis Alexander possessive t-shirts she designed a few years before that, to be fair.
We've referenced it here and there on the podcast before, but Sarah Schulman's book, Conflict is Not Abuse, makes a great case for how overstating harm can lead to detrimental consequences. Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander had a toxic relationship, one of constant conflict as they had different expectations and where their relationship should go. Jodi could justifiably feel led on or used by Travis Alexander as he tried to continue a sexual relationship with her on the side, while looking for a more serious relationship with another Mormon woman. But that isn't abuse, and it doesn't excuse violence toward him. I think a lot of us have either been Jodi Arias or known someone who has, and we can relate to the feeling of being strung on in a relationship. That definitely justifies feeling hurt and even angry at the person who did that, but it doesn't mean we can exact revenge in the form of murder. That's an extreme overreaction to the situation at hand.
I mean, I'm really curious to know if Jodi really fundamentally believes she was a victim of abuse, or if she's like conscious and aware it's a lie. Like, I suspect it's the latter, and we'll never know for sure. But like, it genuinely intrigues me that she might convince herself of her own lies. And I also agree with your point, Erin, here, that being hurt and feeling upset in or after a relationship doesn't necessarily indicate abuse. I'm a huge proponent of conflict is not abuse. I've recommended it to anyone who I know to read. I think there's something to be said about how victimhood here is seen as an inherent sign of moral virtue, that being a victim of abuse makes one morally righteous, and thus, by definition, the offending party is morally evil. And I think actions are no longer assessed by their own merit, but are seen as indicators or proof of a person's moral character.
Right.
And yeah, in this case, it's like, okay, Jodi and Travis engaged in a very harmful relationship, and both parties exhibited morally questionable behavior. Like you said, Travis continued to keep Jodi in his orbit for easy sex and was looking for someone else in the meantime, but it's certainly not abuse, and Jodi is certainly not a survivor of such a thing. And, Travis not being kind or good to her in a relationship is no justification for having his head slashed off.
No, I totally agree. And I think a person who always centers their own feelings will, of course, try to use them to justify all of their behavior. If Jodi thinks she's the only person in this world and her feelings are the only ones that matter, then by that very selfish and twisted logic, anything she does in response to those feelings is okay. And that's a very dangerous way to think.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. And I've seen people extrapolate the political out of the sort of situations where every poor or hurtful act in a relationship deserves punishment. It warrants some sort of punishment. Like, I've been burnt in relationships before, and unfortunately, and to my regret, I've also behaved in ways that hurted people around me. And in neither of those cases is anyone warrant a beheading for this.
Right, exactly. The proportional response to this would be to try your best to cut off contact with that person. And if you absolutely feel like you can't do that, say, hey, you've hurt my feelings. I really think you owe me an apology. I don't need one, but like, go fuck yourself, basically.
Yeah, and definitely not like turn your phone off, pack a bunch of canisters of gas and drive up and,
Right. Like we said at the beginning, as you read through this story or as you listen to it, as you start to go along, you think, okay, I can see why Jodi would feel kind of upset by this. But then the stalking behavior starts and eventually the murder, where it's like, okay, that's not a reasonable response to what is happening. You need a good friend to be like, girl, what is you doing?
Yeah, like to put it simply, I don't like Travis. I think Travis was a dick. I think he sounds like an unpleasant and not necessarily a kind or gentle person.
Friend.
Yeah, I wouldn't seek him out or be his friend. But the world is filled with people that are like that. And I don't think, they should be beheaded en masse because they're not kind.
Right. And how many of the rest of us have been like, oh, this guy or girl or person that we know seems like kind of an asshole. I'm going to keep my distance from now on. Like, that's it.
Yeah, simple as that.
So that is our take on the murder of Travis Alexander. We hope that you like it. If you want more content of ours, if what is available on Spotify or Overcast or however you listen is just not enough, you can find us on patreon.com/dascriminal. And we have a new subscriber. Thank you, Mysum. Mysum is a comrade of mine. So
hey, thanks Mysum. Appreciate it.
And if you subscribe, you have access to our back catalog. So it's not like if you subscribe this month, you only start to get the material now. You can like listen to basically a year's worth of back episodes now. I think we have like almost 20 bonus episodes, like full-length bonus episodes up.
Yeah, have fun, guys. Go wild.
You can find us on Instagram at DasCriminalPod. Of course, we never post explicit photos. You're not going to see any naked photos of Jodi and Travis. We'd never do that.
Yeah, you sickos.
Please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps drive us up the algorithm. And also, Just in these past few weeks, a lot of our friends and listeners have sent us these really nice messages about this show, and you guys have no idea how much that means to us and encourages us. We just love you so much. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Until next time, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.